Recording. Cool. All right. Welcome, everybody. It's our first time doing this, so we apologize if we're not great. We're students just like you, and we love Anki. Honestly, if not for Anki, I would not have survived medical school. So, and I'm sure that two of my classmates, Andrew's above me, and Julie's in my class. Yeah, we can say the same. It is one of the best space repetition tools out there, created by some geniuses, and also like, yeah, and there's just so much integration too. So, oh, and let me just okay, cool. So, yes. So basically, what's gonna happen today? Julie is going to lead us through Notion. It's the kind of the resource that is a combination of all the previous year's resources into like one. So she'll tell you how she made it, what's on it, and she'll tell you how she made her pre-made cards, because that's basically what is like the gold standard for my class. And also things with Anki, using Anki. And then Andrew, who's an MS3, who's in rotations right now, he has finished step 1. So he's going to talk to you about everything regarding Anki's use with step 1, because for the new curriculum, once you hit Hemimmuno, you're hitting stuff that's pretty, well, okay, I guess foundation spot, but definitely Hemimmuno is really relevant for like step 1. And so, you want to keep up these things. And, honestly, I haven't kept up as many as I would like. So, so we'll talk about that. And, Andrew will talk about his step 1 experience and everything, the resources he used. And then there's a bunch of questions you guys asked, and we'll try our best to get through all of them. We're sorry if we don't. And you can always add more questions as we go along. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So dope. Okay, Julie, you can just hop in.
Cool. Hello, I am Julie. I'm also in Gerald's class. Let me share my screen. I'm going to share my whole screen, so hopefully I don't have anything wild on here. And so this is Notion. And Notion, I posted on your guys' Facebook page. If you guys aren't on Facebook, you can check the Facebook page. Actually, Gerald, do you want to send the link to the Notion in the chat just so they can open it up? And this is the Notion. This is the app. So this isn't like the website. And I prefer the app. You can do whatever you want. You can even get it on your phone. And this is the homepage of Notion. For foundations, or for the next several months, you're just going to mainly want to worry about foundations. Don't worry about any of the other blocks. And we're still in second year, so you'll see neuro, renal, GI, a bunch of stuff added to this in the next couple months once we start our blocks. But right now you're going to be on foundations. The main part that makes Notion helpful is the other resources that are added to this, and that's all of this stuff. First, I would start just reading this medical school resources, so you know kind of what we're talking about, because you may hear today us mention Sketchy and Pixarize and like, oh, for anatomy, definitely use French notes. And this is all, they're all kind of explained here. Anki's also explained here, but we're going to spend the next like hour talking about Anki. And then if you want to access these, they're all here. And some of them, when we mentioned, we talk about how Pixarize isn't free. Sketchy technically also isn't free, but some other student recorded some videos, and Sketchy's mainly, there's not many here because I don't think you guys really start Sketchy until Hemimmuno, but Sketchy's super helpful. A lot of these things you're gonna have to buy subscriptions for, but everything that is on the Notion is free. And so these are like Ninja Nerd videos. So like this is one of your first lectures you'll have in a week or so, and that's cell membrane structure and transport, which you guys knew in undergrad, but they'll go over it again. And then here's Ninja Nerd videos if you're struggling with it. So a lot of people just use Notion for, if you're really struggling with one of these lectures, you can kind of just hopefully find other secondary resources to go along with it. Another part of on Notion that you'll find is the Anki deck. Every single page, so there's Anki deck for foundations, Hemimmuno, you have another Anki deck. And the foundation page has a ton of information on the Anki deck. So I think Gerald told you guys to go through and download Anki and then download Anking and then my Loma Linda decks. And so here's hopefully where you downloaded it. And then there's a tutorial on how to import it, and there's a ton of stuff. So that's Notion. I'm not going to pause for questions, or Gerald, should I pause for questions on Notion right now before I move on to Anki, or?
If anyone asks, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Just put your questions in the chat, basically.
Okay, put your questions in the chat, and then Gerald will interrupt me if you guys have questions about what Notion is or using the Notion. So now moving on to Anki, you guys can see this, right? I'm assuming yes. Okay. So this is not the profile that I use, but this is hopefully kind of what your profile will look like right now once you've downloaded Anki and the Foundations block deck. There's a video that I went through. I went through all of this on a video, but I'll just kind of go through it a little bit again right now. You'll see that there's nothing due and there's nothing new, and that's because you haven't added anything. Every time you import a new deck, whether like for a new block, you won't have any cards due, and that's because I suspended everything because it stressed me out seeing like thousands of cards due as soon as I downloaded it, and so everything's suspended. When you go through, you're going to go to browse and you click on browse, and that's how you can see all of the cards that you're doing. And then you'll unsuspend cards that way. So basically, starting from the beginning, this is your whole collection. These are all of the cards that you just downloaded, kind of unorganized. You can organize them by when they're created, by the deck type, when they're due, once you start doing some cards, the card type, sort field. Usually I keep them as created because there's 3 different types of banks that I use to create the Loma Linda bank. So basically there's Anki, and Anki is this gigantic deck. So these are the 2 decks that you see on that homepage, the Anki deck and the Foundations block deck. The Anki deck is this giant bank that med students all over the world use, and that's kind of the gold standard for step studying and all of that. And then the Foundations block deck is the decks or the deck of other cards. And right now it may not have the Anki cards in it, and I'll show you how to move the Anki cards into the Foundations block cards. But when you're looking at your whole collection, I'll kind of explain where all these cards came from. All of the cards from 2013 and around 2014, those came from 2 previous students when they were in medical school in that time, so several years ago, and they created all of these cards. So like all of these amino acid cards were created by them. If you go down a little more, all of these cards are Anki cards, and you can tell because you can kind of see what these cards will look like eventually. And Anki cards are amazing because they always have a ton of information on them. So they have first aid information and just lots of information. We can preview what the cards will look like. And basically this is what Anki is. This is how you would do Anki. So you're reading the treatment for Neisseria gonorrhea is ceftriaxone and something else or doxycycline for possible chlamydia infection. You try to think of the answer to that question. Then you hit spacebar. Oh, it was azithromycin. And then, I don't know. And then at the bottom, usually what shows up is like good, easy, hard, and you choose whether that was an easy card. Did you know it? Did you not know it? And depending on whether this card was easy or hard, it'll show up in a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months. It can get stressful when it's like your test is tomorrow and you're like, I want to see this before tomorrow. And so you can choose something so that you can see this before tomorrow. And all the Anki cards will have a ton of information. First aid, sketchy is this, which you can read about and learn what sketchy is later.
And so Julie, if I could add something to what you're saying, be 100% honest with yourself. There were many, many times I'm like, oh, I could pick this out of a multiple choice thing. And there was a question on it, I didn't get it right. Just be honest with yourself. If the card was hard for you, you took 30 seconds to come up with the answer, like, but it was hard. There's no shame in it. No one else is gonna know.
Yeah, definitely.
That's about it.
So all of these are Anki cards, all the 2016, 2017, all of this. When we start getting back down to 2019, these were all created by one of Gerald's best friends, actually, in Andrew's class. His name is MY. He created all of these cards. And the reason he created cards, I think he actually made all of his own cards, but the reason I use a lot of his cards is because you'll learn very quickly, especially Foundations block. There's a lot of information that Loma Linda wants you to know that STEP does not care about at all. That doesn't mean it's not relevant to our future as physicians. Like you need to know, anatomy, but anatomy isn't on STEP really at all. And so there's a lot of other cards, like Anki really doesn't have any anatomy cards. So a lot of the anatomy cards you're going to see are from MY or other resources. So these are all MY's cards. And then when you get to the last year, I don't know if there's any here, but at if it's made in like end of 2020, it's probably cards that I made. These are Anki cards. So with that said, there's a ton of other things about Anki, especially the settings. So there's certain settings that you can go to under options, and you're going to want to customize these steps. because right now, actually, let me show you a different way. So let's go to browse. First, I'll show you how to add cards, and then I'll show you kind of how to do cards. Sorry, we're backtracking. So these are tags. These little icons that look like this, these are tags. These are the decks that we just went through. Whole collection, current deck. These are tags. You're going to want to go to the Loma Linda tags. These are the On King tags, and this is what I went through because I would use, let's say, a resource called Boards and Beyond, and then I'd be like, oh, right now we're learning about dermatology and we're learning about the skin. Oh, this is exactly what I just learned. So I would go Control J and unsuspend that. And that took a ton of work just because you have to go through for every single lecture and try to find like, oh, well, that's not exactly what we learned, but I kind of want to find something similar. And then you can use a search. Let's say I wanted to learn about plaques. So then you search and you're like, okay, multiple sclerosis, yeah. And so you can search plaque. And then you're like, well, how about, so you can use this bar a ton of different ways. But what hopefully will be easiest for you is to just go into Loma Linda, these tags under foundations, and test one. One of the first lectures you're going to have is the cell overview. And so this is your first lecture. So I made it so you can just go to applicable, Control A, Control J, and those are all unsuspended. And they even have, these have some. So these are all On King cards. And you can see that by looking here. And these are all On King. And so they're relevant to your first lecture. And that way you don't have to go through and find the On King cards that are relevant. But then when I go here to the home page, you can see I have 110 cards that I have to do now in this deck that I just unsuspended in Cell Overview, but there's still 14 in On King. And that's because I didn't move them to decks. So if I start clicking on Foundations block, and this is how you start to do your decks. So you go to Study Now, but I'm not doing those 14 cards, and I want to do those 14 cards. So go back to Browse, and when you unsuspend those cards, you also need to move them, because you see this is the deck that I was just about to do, but these 14 On King cards are not in that deck. So I'm going to Control A, or I could just change deck. Actually, I'm just gonna do that for these 14 cards. So change deck or Command D, and then I want to change it to Cell Overview, this one, move cards, and I go back here, and now they're all in that deck. So hopefully that makes sense and it wasn't too rushed. So now this is how it should look like. Hopefully in the morning when you wake up, you have these cards to do, you start doing the cards, Study Now, and then you just start thinking about it. But you'll see that when I click Show Answer, I am either going to see it, if I was really bad, like I had no idea what that was, I'll do it again, or I'll do it in 10 minutes. If it was easy, I'll do it in 4 days. And if you watch the On King videos, he talks about this extensively. I would really, really, really recommend that you guys do what he suggested, because I don't like, the main complaint that I hear about Anki, even though I think it's an amazing resource to use, is that it just takes people way too much time to go through it. And that's what mainly people complain about, because Andrew, you said you do like 700 cards a day?
Yeah, when I was in the thick of it, let's say 2 weeks before, I was on a different curriculum than you guys are going to be. I was the last year of that curriculum. About 2 weeks before our test to a week, I've been waking up to between 750 and 850 cards a day.
Yeah, so you get through, because you can see just this one lecture, and this is probably like an hour of your life just watching that lecture, but it's 124 cards. And you guys have like 3 to 4 lectures a day. So every single day you need to get through 400 cards at least to do new ones. And if you get behind on Anki reviews, then it just gets really horrible. There's no way that you can like just save them up to the very end of the week and then just do all the cards at the end of the week, because that defeats the purpose of Anki. The purpose of Anki is to go through it every single day. And that's the beauty of, when I click on this card and I'm like, I had no idea what this was, so I definitely need to see it today, tomorrow. I can see it in 4 days because I was fine, things like that. So you need to be doing it every single day and hopefully getting through that lectures cards in that day. So I would suggest you change this so it's not 10 minutes. Because honestly, if you don't know this card and you see it again in a minute, you're probably going to know it. And then if you see it again in 10 minutes, you'll know it. But what I choose to do, I don't know. Gerald, can you tell me the numbers for it? I think I changed it to.
Can you switch profile? Maybe you can show your working profile.
And while they're doing that, if I could add some, sorry, Julie, go ahead.
No, I'm good.
All right, yeah. If I could add something to realization I made about halfway through my first year, is that Anki is a lot. It's going to take a lot of your time. I spent about 2.5 hours a day doing it throughout the first 2 years. But the reason you do Anki is because, like Julie was just showing you, easy, good, hard, that kind of thing. The program after a while will start showing you where your weak areas are, and it'll show you the stuff that you're weak on more frequently and the stuff that you have down less frequently. It's a smarter way to study, as opposed to, I had classmates who would just read the PowerPoint once and that's a studying, or they would read the handout once and that was studying. No, this works for me in that it allowed you to kind of see what you're lacking in. You saw what needed to be seen at that time, and it spaces it out. You can read up studies, a lot of stuff on spaced repetition about how that's one of the better ways to learn information.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm switching back now to the other profile.
Yeah, it's okay. You don't have to go through the exact numbers. I put the YouTube video. So yeah,
well,
just check that out. Oh, or
here.
that. Never mind.
So now that I switched it, now instead of doing like 1 minute or 10 minutes, I'm on 25 minutes in one day. So now if I know this card, and usually for me, I go through the cards right after I make the cards or once I go through the lecture. So I think, and you'll learn very quickly, everyone studies differently. So take all of our advice, this whole thing, with a grain of salt. We're just trying to help you as best as we can, but you'll come up with you'll hear a lot of different advice. But I suggest to do this, because if you go through this right after the lecture, you're probably going to know that telomerase is a rare example of reverse transcriptase activity occurs endogenously in humans. You'll probably know that, so you can see it tomorrow. And then tomorrow, it'll show it. If you know it tomorrow, you'll probably know it in 3 days, and that's the next graduated interval. So it'll keep going. I don't think there's any purpose, because the other, if you see it every 1 or 10 minutes, then you'll see it twice a day, and you'll have to go through twice as many cards. And you don't have time for that. So I suggest switching to that. But yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to go through. Gerald, is there anything I'm missing?
Sure. Let me jump in and share my screen. Just
Okay.
some few things. So I'm going to share my browse window as well. Here we go. Here's my browse window. Okay, you guys should be able to see it. So one thing that Julie was saying was to sort things by date. So I'm going to go to like LLUSM, like foundations, let's say whatever, cell overview. And also, yeah, like what I was saying in the chat, like this exists, this bar exists, and so many other things exist on your Anki if you download the add-ons. So that's like super huge. Like add-ons make Anki so much more usable. So if you don't see these things, it's because you don't have the add-ons in. But anyways, so we're here on applicable. You might notice that you don't have a created column, and that's because on default, it doesn't give that. And so what you do is like right-click and add whatever column you want. So right here is the created column. So that's like the key one to help sort your cards, right? And then you can like, if you want to be able to see more of like the question, you can like, oh, sorry, here. You like put this more like that, or if you want to see more of the deck, so you organize your browse window however you want to see things, and make sure you have the date. The date is super helpful. So I think another add-on that's super random that I'm going to show too, it's called Enjoy. Basically, think of any Bluetooth like controller. It could be like a simple like Bluetooth controller you can find maybe $50 on like Amazon, or like I actually literally took my Switch controller here. Some people use like PS3, Xbox, whatever. Basically, you program like Anki buttons to like here. And not everyone uses it, but it's honestly super like, oh, there you go. There's Andrew. He uses it too. It's great because you literally just sit back and just go like, boom, 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 boom. You stare at the screen. You don't have to like press space bar with your hands physically. You like, code it. So I will send you some information later about that. Like we won't spend too much time talking about that, but there's just a bunch of other cool add-ons, some fun add-ons like Pokemon integrated, like whatever, like cats, dogs, whatever. Like people do some wild things with Anki. So anyways,
there's an add-on if you get 10 cards in a row correctly. It shows you a little cute kitten. It's totally useless, but if you want it, it's there.
Oh, and I think also one more add-on that we can talk about, Amboss, huge add-on. There is, okay, I'll share my screen again so you can see it. Amboss is one of I guess the big like board reviews. Andrew will talk about UWorld, so that's another one. But AMBOSS, think of it as like the med school encyclopedia of things you need to know for boards and stuff. So wait, sorry, let me share my screen. And so AMBOSS integrated an app with Anki that it's right here, right? And then you can like actually see the AMBOSS like viewer while you're doing Anki. You could like literally look up like, like a syndrome like on the side. But if you're doing a card, I actually didn't finish one of my cards today. So wow, you can watch me do cards. So like here you can see I'm learning some stuff about digoxin, and I'm like, oh, quinidine, yay. And then there's a bunch of like underlined things. If you put your like cursor over it, you can see like a very quick summary of these things, and it's super helpful. So you can reference like, oh yeah, like digoxin is this, and then you can go like, oh, okay, what does AMBOSS say? And then it'll go over here and it'll slowly change. And then here you go, you have digoxin or cardiac glycosides. So super helpful integration, man. Like whoever made that was genius. And yeah, they will talk to you about AMBOSS maybe like first 2 weeks, right, Julie? They're like, hey,
Yeah,
like,
I think they actually are going to buy it for your class.
oh,
I may be mistaken because
there
I'm
you
pretty
go.
sure they're buying it for your class.
That's great.
So
If you have it bought for you, take it, use it.
yeah, and then you can you'll have that account, use that add-on with it. And someone asked a question on how to make your own cards, and I'll show you really quickly again. So a lot of people just use my cards and that's it. I don't like, it's not that I don't recommend that, but figure out what works for you and don't just blindly go in and do my cards if that's not what works for you. So if you want to make your own cards, I don't even make my own cards. What I do is I decide what on King cards I want. I decide what cards from Gerald's friend I want. And someone asked if they could have Gerald's friends cards. You can. I think Gerald can probably send you the link to it, but it's going to be a lot of work because all the old curriculum, their lectures were completely different than how our class had it. So we had to go through a lot of work and kind of restructure, like, did they even get taught on this lecture? Where is this lecture? Like, and then there's some lectures that are completely brand new for our class. There's a bunch of different things like that. But the thing is, I'm pretty sure there's going to be lectures for your class that we've never had before, because they'll probably decide like, oh, we didn't actually, there will be, because I remember at least in MSK, they sent us an email being like, oh, we forgot to teach you this. So we're just not going to teach it to you. So you guys will have to figure out what to do for that lecture. I never had it. So if you want to make your own cards, what you can, and someone was asking if they could tag it with LLUSM, and you can, and I'd appreciate that if, there are new lectures and we could just keep this going for future classes. All you do is add tags. And then when you add it, you just enter the tags to add. So, and you can see here, it suggests which one. So let's say I want to add it to the foundations desk, tag, or deck, test 1, etc. And then you can add it like, oh, I want to do biochem, stuff like that. And then if you want to make your own cards, you go here, add, and then there's a ton of different types of cards that you can make. You can do basic cards, and there's a ton of different basic cards. I think I made some, oh, it's not on this one. But basic cards are basically just your typical flashcard front and back. I really love closed deletion cards, and that's what we've been showing you, and that's mostly what people use, and that's where it kind of deletes a portion, and I think that makes your brain work a little bit, well, not harder, but it's a little easier for you to get through, because if you have a card that's asking like, describe cholesterol transport, some people like that card, but then you're going to have to think through a whole paragraph of information in your mind, and you're not going to know exactly which information you're missing, because maybe you describe the first 3 steps of cholesterol transport really well, but you're missing the last 4, and then you're kind of like, oh, I got it, and you move on. Then that's not as good as if you have very specific cards asking, do you know this compound? Do you know this drug? And things like that. So I prefer closed cards. If it's a completely new lecture and there's no deck for it that I've made, you can start going through all of these tags and kind of thinking like, let's say it's in this next block and it's a biochem lecture. So a good biochem resource, maybe first aid, here's biochem. If it's a genetics thing, go to genetics, Hardy-Weinberg. So there's a bunch of different tags that they have. If there's nothing in first aid, maybe try boards and beyond. Here's another biochem. So these are all the different resources that are on Notion and explained on Notion. And then you can kind of go through like, oh, they did mention cystic fibrosis. Is there anything relevant here? And then it'd be like, oh yeah, we did learn about these 3 things, and then unsuspend those.
And if I could interject really quickly, Julie, if wasn't mentioned already, the first aid where you are right now is an excellent way to go through the first aid textbook. You're going to catch yourselves a lot going through first aid, reading chapter by chapter. And this is organized as you see it right now by heading, subheading, subheading, that kind of stuff. So you'll read the paragraph or two they have, or look at the table or the chart, and you can quickly go in there and literally just unsuspend all the cards of stuff that just pertain to what you learned. It's incredible. It's really efficient. Don't waste your time searching. I spent a lot of my first year searching for cards. And while that is a really thorough way to go about it, you're smarter than that. You go just do it that way. And Julie, if you could go back to Anki for a quick second. I don't know if you showed them this. Go Command F.
Command F. Here?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, there. Type XX. Oh, try again. You may not have the add-on. Yeah, that's a great way to search by tag. So let's say you're doing your cystic fibrosis chapter, type in cystic fibrosis, and it'll show you every tagged card, or like every card that has a tag pertaining to the complications, diagnosis, treatment overview from the various resources. That's the Board and Beyond lecture on it. You got the Pixarize stuff. I don't know anyone who uses Pixarize. Sketchy Farm, and a lot of the first aid stuff. And they're laughing because no one uses Pixarize.
Oh, Pixarize is actually helpful. I use it sometimes.
Is it actually?
Yeah. Well,
okay, I retract that.
Sketchy doesn't cover everything. If there's no Sketchy on it, then you
some heme stuff. Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. And first aid that you were talking about, I was going to go here really quickly, because under med school resources, I have a whole thing on textbooks. Some people have been asking me, should you buy textbooks? No, do not buy textbooks. Well, unless there can be exceptions, but I've never met an exception of a med student that studies with a textbook, but maybe there is. But I linked textbooks here, and here is First Aid 2021 that you can download. A lot of people prefer physical ones, and I think I would prefer a physical one. I haven't bought one yet because I'm cheap, but I think it may be helpful for step studying. So if you want to get a physical
one. In terms of step studying, since you triggered me with that one, what I just did is I have the iPad Pro, really recommend it. I've actually had a couple of your classmates who I know text me about it. Absolutely get an iPad Pro is my full endorsement. And then I just split up first aid by chapters and then throw each chapter into Notability. That way, oh no, I spilled water on my screen. No, it's fine. I didn't damage the book. I know people who have lost their first aid, and that they need religious intervention because you just lost your biggest study source halfway through second year kind of thing. You want to protect yourself, use cloud backups for everything because you can't afford to lose anything through these first 2 years.
I may be repeating this, but Anki is basically some really smart dudes turning first aid and a bunch of other resources into Anki cards. So if they say use first aid, you can basically study all of Anki. That's kind of like the ultimate goal. But honestly, in the nutshell, you probably need to know like the most of it because it's pass fail, and my class, Julie's class, first class, pass fail. So we don't even have to care about score. You'll never know score. People will never know score. So your score is pass. So you're not competing with anyone at that point. So,
and to tag on to what Gerald just said, but it's step one, we can pass it. No, like I think more than a quarter of my class failed the trial step. At the end of second year, they gave you this thing called the CBSE, the Comprehensive Basic Science Exam. About a quarter of our class failed it. Just scary because you're supposed to be taking step 3-4 weeks after you graduate or you finish your second year. So don't take it lightly. You don't want to be the person who fails the pass fail step, especially if you're going for AOA, which is the Medical School Honor Society. You can't repeat any of the years, you can't fail any courses, and you have to pass the board exams on your first try.
Andrew, yeah, just keep talking about step. It's your time.
Oh my gosh, the harbinger of death, that step. Step one is, you shouldn't concern yourself, I'd say, for the first couple months about it, but just keep it in the back of your mind. It is the examination that's given at the end of your second year of med school. It tests you over the basic science concepts that you've learned. The biggest topics, about 50% of it is pathology. So heme immunoblock, pay very much attention to that. That'll set you up for success or be your biggest crutch. We can talk more later about study techniques, what I did, what people who scored a lot higher than I did. But yeah, study diligent for your class. We don't know whether this curriculum prepares you guys for the pass-fail step because Julie and Gerald are part of that curriculum that'll be our guinea pigs. But I have full faith and confidence in those two. From my experience, though, you just have to be really diligent, take everything as if, okay, this is going to be on step. Because in truth, everything is fair game for the first 2 years, which is kind of terrifying to talk about. Yes, the Anki deck is like 40,000 cards. All of it is fair game for step. Some things are more than other. And one of the biggest things, not just for step, but for med school, is being able to parse out content that is high yield and is not. I don't know, Julie, if you talked about this or not, but beginning of all the lectures, they'll give you this thing called the objectives. It's about 10 to 12 bullet points of like, okay, we have 100 slides, but here are like the 10, 12 overriding concepts I want you to get out of this lecture. And that can really help you a lot. There were some courses, Embryo, where I was able to eliminate about half of the lecture because half of it just wasn't part of the objective. It was supplemental, it was for our own interest, but a lot of students wasted their time studying everything equally. That's not the case for your courses, and that is not the case for STEP. Julie has her finger up. Go.
I will touch on that because that's why I just do your own. Like, you can start with my decks as a foundation, but then do your own thing, because I am an overachiever, as every single med student is, but I'm an extra overachiever to where, like, if the teacher mentioned the topic at all, I will unsuspend a card on it. Like, if they happen to mention like, oh, by the way, like this drug is a treatment for this, and moves on, I'll unsuspend the drug, or I'll unsuspend that card, and you may be like, they barely even mention this, I'm not going to spend my time on this card, and that's fine. Do your own thing. Like for Embryo, if they mentioned something, I would try my best. Like, I unsuspended redundant cards and things like that, because there's a lot of concepts that you'll like. Staph aureus is the worst bacteria in everything, and so I unsuspended so many cards in Staph aureus, so many, and it's definitely redundant. So you can go through my cards and be like, I don't want all these cards in Staph aureus, and that's fine. So that's my little side comment on like where I do have a lot of redundant cards, and so you can probably go through. And that's also why I didn't mention this, but I have the 2 different tags. Let me share my screen again.
And while Julie does that, oh no, you finish first. I have something I want to say, but you go first.
Okay, I have these different tags under LLUSM, and some say applicable. I think, yeah, here I think it's more stark for anatomy, so I'll go through anatomy. Here, there's 66 cards that are applicable, but there's 72 cards tagged total. And so that depends on, if you're more of an overachiever than I am, all of the applicable cards are the cards that I tagged and I use. But if you want to see some extra cards that I was like, oh, well, this is relevant to the lecture, but I don't really care for these cards, and I didn't use them, and that's where all of the previous students' cards came in. Because sometimes Gerald's friend MY, he would make cards for a lecture that On King covered. Honestly, no offense to MY, but I trusted On King cards way more, and those are the cards that I kept, and I'm still trying to go through this summer and do before we take STEP. So I only did those cards. But if you want to use MY's cards as well, and the student from 2013, if you want to use their cards, they're all underneath these tags. But if you just want to do the cards that I did, because you don't want to put that much thought into it, then just unsuspend everything that's inapplicable. Like this has 91 cards, this has 114 that's relevant to this anatomy lecture. So that's my little blurb.
Yeah, that's excellent. One thing I will add, since I took a shot at Embryo is actually quite important, although I wasn't that well taught for us. I know how it was for Gerald and Julie. If you could comment quickly on how it was taught for you guys. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, Embryo, they love Embryo for some reason on STEP. I got a couple questions on it, and it's like not straightforward. You'll go through the whole question. The paragraphs, the stems are about 1 or 2 paragraphs long, and then you'll the whole way through like, oh sweet, this is like a renal tubular acidosis kind of question. Like I can do this all day, every day. And then the final line of the stem is, and what is the derivative? Like this issue originates in which part of the renal tubule, and what's the derivative of that? And you're like, screw you guys. That's a quick aside. Do you want me to talk about STEP studying now? Or do you guys want to go about like finishing the whole Anki thing, and then I can give my recommendations for how to study for STEP throughout the first 2 years?
Yeah, I think just talk about how Anki cards, I mean, mainly, right, in STEP. Yeah,
absolutely.
STEP is 1.5 years away from them. So just like what they can do right now, then maybe worry about STEP, but they don't need to worry about like what.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. That narrows me down a lot, thanks. Yeah, I used Anki beginning December of my first year, and between that and finishing second year, I did about 430,000 card reviews. Like I said, it's no joke. Med school's a lot. Be religious with your Anki. Set a time aside every day. For me, that was I'd wake up every day at 5 and I would non-negotiable have worship. Then I would just power through my cards. I did the Pomodoro technique, which is a 25-minute timer. Really recommend that for Anki and for just studying in general, because you're not going to do straight 6-8 hours a day every day. Take the 5-minute break every 25 or the 10 every 50. You can get apps for that. Yeah, do the cards every day. I like to keep up with that because the minute you fall behind on cards, they just keep piling up, and it's really a bad time. It's good studying, but yeah, you don't want to fall behind with cards. So like I said, wake up every morning, non-negotiable, do the cards every morning, go through my lectures. Again, different curriculum than you guys, so listen to them, but I'd go through the lectures, pull out the cards, study them, wake up the next morning, rinse and repeat for 2 years. So I guess for you guys right now with Anki, the biggest thing is just become proficient in Anki as quickly as you can be. Know how the studying works best for you. Some people study in the evening, I study in the morning. Some people space it out through the day. I did that actually through step studying. I spaced it out throughout the day. I do like 10-15 minutes every hour of studying. So find what works for you. That's the biggest thing in med school. Find what works for you. One thing that I didn't do that looking back, I wish I would have done is started UWorld at the beginning. What is UWorld? Julie, I believe you talk about that on the page. Yes, no, not really. UWorld is the gold standard. Let me pull up their website quickly. Actually, let me pull this bad boy up. Give me a second, y'all. We're making things happen here. Let's go to uworld.com and let me share my screen with you guys.
Melinda, I think, gives you guys a UWorld subscription in your second year because we just got ours.
Gives you pay for it, but yes, I agree with that. Yeah, you may want to talk with your class leadership whenever you guys have elections about maybe getting UWorld sooner, the group discount, but the discount I think was $50. So if you're willing to eat $50, by all means, UWorld, whenever it loads. In the meantime, UWorld is a question bank of about 3,700 questions now, all really good for step studying. Highly recommend them. They are taken and inspired from NBME practice tests, NBME National Board of Medical Examiners. Took me a while to figure that one out. Just 2 practice questions. That's the whole shebang, is not knowing the content alone. It's knowing how they're going to present it. Like I said earlier, you'll have 2 paragraphs and lead you to a diagnosis of RTA4, for instance, but then, oh, it's actually going this other way. So this isn't loading. Oh, well, yeah, UWorld is the practice question set. You click that link if it's not working for me. I would start it as soon as possible, going back in all honesty, because like I said, it's a lot of questions. You don't want to be cramming yourself, and it's good practice. You do those questions. It's another way to synthesize the information. I had a tutor throughout my first year, and there's no shame in that. A lot of your classmates will have tutors, and if I were you, I'd get a tutor ASAP. You don't want to fall behind with your grades. It's better you get the tutor and then realize you don't need them after 1 or 2 test cycles, then go 3 or 4 test cycles like, oh, I needed them the whole time. I know students who have failed because of that, and it's not fun. So get your tutor, go through UWorld. I would say you're going to have like a heme block, or MSK block, and you can break it down by that subject in UWorld. Do the pertinent questions. So while you're studying for classes, you're also technically studying for step studying. And then when it comes time for you to actually start like kicking it into high gear for step studying, which for you guys, I believe will be the beginning of your second year, but you also have a longer dedicated period. So I don't know how that's going to work. I'm curious to see. You don't have to chug through upwards of 4,000 questions in the span of 4-6 weeks. I think there was a question about that. Not for foundations. Foundations is FCM, right, guys?
No, it's like basic, like biochem, anatomy, cell. No,
I mean, there are some biochem questions, there are some cell questions, but for the most part, I'd say use foundations to kind of get used to med school. And then what's your first block after that?
Hemimmuno.
Yeah, tons of questions on that. That's general path, so you should be fine. Any questions? I'm trying, like, I just did it for 2 years, but I'm like struggling to to say it out loud of what you actually do. Yeah, I would say do UWorld, do those questions whenever they pop up. Good studying. You get to see new ways of learning the information, how they're going to show it to you. With our curriculum, the questions that they would give us on tests sometimes threw us for a loop. But for the most part, at Loma Linda, questions are fairly straightforward. That is not the usual for board exams. Because patients aren't usual. Patients are not straightforward. I've even had, I'm on my OB-GYN rotation right now, and I've had patients straight up lie to me. So life is like that. You have to roll with it. Learn different ways that they can test the same material on.
I can jump in, Andrew.
Yeah.
I think probably one question that comes to mind as everyone's listening is, what is the difference between like old and new curriculum? So I'm going to just quickly go through that. The old curriculum basically taught in year one everything that's quote unquote right, and then second year everything that's quote unquote wrong. So example, first year anatomy, cell, embryo, genetics, I don't know, what, biochem, physiology.
Physiology was the big one, yeah.
Okay, there you
saw
go.
The normal during your first year and then the abnormal during your second year.
Yeah.
And the reason I think I like your guys' curriculum more is that while yes, if you see cardio in your first year, you're never going to see it again. So like that's where Anki comes in. You keep up with that information. Yes. Because there's a lot more abnormal in medicine than there is normal. There's about 40% more content to learn through our second year. So we really revved it up to like an 1100 during the second year.
Yeah.
From talking with the soon to be second years, that's not the case. Everyone's kind of relaxed because you already know like the level of intensity to expect. And I like that your curriculum has, I believe, 20% less time in lectures. If that's the case, yeah. They crunched you down. You guys end your second year a lot sooner than we did. We ended in May. You guys end in January.
March.
Which is great.
Yeah.
You end in March or in January?
We'll finish all of our content in end of January. We'll finish classes in March.
We just spent like all of February reviewing. And then I think our fourth year is like 20 weeks of vacation time.
Yeah. Fourth year is the promised land, guys, honestly. Yeah, step isn't scored. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I know that you guys probably saw the schedule for this year, and they kind of put by blocks. So I'll just tell you the overhead things of what to expect. Foundations is 12 weeks, right? And the main challenge that you will discover is how to learn a lot of information in a short period of time. And so we talk about Anki because that's was worked for us. And, you might discover that's not, but basically you need to try to learn whatever you learn in week 1, hopefully you remember in week 12 type thing, right?
Yeah.
And then
sorry if I interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
We didn't know, or at least a lot of people that I talked to in my class didn't know that the 12 weeks is cumulative, because we were kind of like, okay, done with the first test, let's just move on to test 2 and we can just forget all of the information. It is cumulative, which is why Anki is so beautiful. And so, because you'll keep on reviewing that information without actually having to go back and review like, oh, what is cell membrane and structure and things like that, because you'll just see a couple cards every single day. But it is cumulative. I just like to point that out because we didn't know that.
Yeah. And, I think one thing that sucks about Anki is the everyday thing. Yes, it does take a long time. Yes, I studied on Saturday nights. For those of you who are Adventists, when the sun came down, the cards went up and it sucked. But when you're in test week and you feel like you know everything, because you actually kind of do for the most part, because you remember your decks and you see your friends cramming, it was worth it. Honestly, like you will go on test. I mean, of course, there's the mental aspect of it, right? Like approaching a test. But if you have yourself like calm enough and you get to the test, you will know at least 70% of the information, guaranteed, if you keep up with your reviews. And that's the thing. Not everyone keeps up with their reviews. And that's how Anki works. So it's either an all or nothing thing, in my opinion. Like you either do it and you go all in, or try something else. Like don't half it, because you won't really experience what Anki really has to offer.
That's an excellent way to put it, Gerald. Yeah.
Yeah. So after you do foundations, is 12 weeks, you'll have like, I think a selective, have a little bit of a break, and then you'll hit Hemimmuno. And so it honestly, that's like you're entering MS2, because you are doing like pathology, pathophys, microbio, pharmacology. And so you're going to learn, like, let's say the first day, like here's about like blood cells. And then like a day later, you'd be like, okay, here's what happens when it goes wrong. And it's a whole different thing. Like learning how to approach like a question that says a patient comes in with X, Y, and Z, and here's their lab values. And what do you think? And it's just, it'll be different. It's not as simple as maybe regurgitating info as foundations will feel like. So there will be an adjustment, and so I'm just saying that so that you won't be surprised at the feeling of change when you hit a different block, because every block will be different. Some blocks will be more challenging than others. Some of you that loved physics will love cardio and palm. I hate physics, so I hated those blocks. You'll see when you get there, but basically approach every block differently. Someone said something about, okay, well, yeah, like cumulative tests just per block, but we really encourage you, like Andrew said, try to keep up your Anki cards past the block, because when you hit Hemimmuno, you're hitting it in November of your first year, and then you'll never see it again. But if you don't review it, you'll forget everything. And then when you're coming to like 2 months before step and you're like, what was like lymphomas about? And then it will kind of suck. And honestly, if you can try to, like, here's my ultimate goal, and I think Julie may be on the same page too. Like, if you can keep up your Anki reviews, and like when you got your 6 weeks of studying for step, and because it's pass fail, you take 2 weeks, you take step, you pass, and you have a life for 4 weeks, and you'll love that life, because you don't really have a life sometimes because you're pressing Anki.
And continue what Gerald just said. Oh no, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. That's about it. Go.
We're really good at interrupting each other. I've noticed that. One thing that was really nice with Anki, like especially for step studying, and even more so because you guys are not going to be seeing the information once that block ends, is a classmate will come up to you, or you'll overhear like, oh, I need to go back and like study cardiac phys, for instance. And you're like, oh, that sucks for them because I've been keeping up with it for a year and a half. Like that material's down, as opposed to, like I said, especially with your curriculum, you're not going to see Hemimmuno as your first block. You're not going to see it ever again until you take step. So it's good to keep up with old information. It's nice, get a lot of questions right, solely because like, oh, I remember that thing. I wouldn't have remembered if I didn't keep up with my cards.
Answering Joycelyn's question. Okay, so we unsuspend cards that are LLU cards that are not Anking. So after you go through a block, you basically like take like 30 minutes and you go through your browse, and you'll see like the formatting. Like Anking cards have like a certain font and they have a certain feel, and they all have close. So you just suspend the cards that are not Anking, and then you try your best to keep up. And something you'll notice is that Anking cards are just like one word things, or like they're small. So like you will move through them much faster than some of the pre-made cards. Julie, you were going to say something.
Yeah. And if you guys are really curious, I think right now, just figure out if Anki works for you at all. And then, but if you are really curious about how to kind of go forward after foundations is over, I have a whole, like a bunch of videos, or one video on the Hemimmuno, which is your next block. That page on Notion kind of talking about how you can go through and suspend all of the other like Loma Linda specific cards, like anatomy ones that you don't need to know for step. And so, yeah, if you're really curious about how to do that, you can watch that video. But right now, just figure out if you like Anki and if it works at all.
I know a lot of you ask questions about study routine. So I just want Julie and Andrew to kind of, I'll add in too. What was like your study routine? How often did you use Anki? Study schedule, study workflow. Just say something along those lines of what you do.
Before I continue, I saw a good question from Mary. Can we suspend from our iPads? The answer is yes, with a lot of extra steps. I would not recommend using the iPad app or the phone app to really manage your Anki decks. It's just the computer is like the gold standard. Use the computer app for everything, but definitely spend the $25. Get the phone app, get the iPad app. Once you pay for it in your phone, it goes to all the other iOS devices or Android, if that's the way you lean in the world. But yeah, don't try to do anything from the iPads. And Gerald, to understand the question was, how did I kind of like, what was my flow with Anki, or?
Like, talk about like from lecture to test, right? So when you hear the lecture, how do you take in the information? How do you review the information?
I didn't listen to lectures. I tried going for 2 test cycles to lectures first year. I'm like, this is not for me. So what I would do is I would just go, and for you guys to go to Notion, thank Julie a million times for that one, and like download the notes, and I would put on my iPad, just start writing away, start notating, making connections, that kind of thing. And I would also have Anki open, and like I would be searching it. You guys are going to have your cards already organized for you. By the time you finish the lecture, you've unsuspended, you've looked at that pre-tagged deck already, unsuspend, and immediately after I finish the lecture, I would quiz myself with Anki. And then I wouldn't see that information until the following morning. And the stuff I got right, moved on. Stuff I didn't, I'd learn it again. That's about it.
Julie, you want to quickly answer the question, then we'll give it the open Q&A.
What question?
Just like workflow from.
Oh,
like,
sorry. Wasn't even paying attention to what I was answering. So I watch the lecture. I know a lot of people don't watch lectures, but I love watching lectures because I like knowing what professors, because to me, like right now, passing the block is most important. And I can worry about step in a year, less than a year. But so I like to know what the professors emphasize, especially the anatomy ones, because they can be all over the place. So I want to know, they're like, oh, this nerve is really important. And if you don't watch lectures, you don't get to know that information, and they don't have handouts. But for most other lectures, they'll have handouts. So I watch the lectures, hopefully at 2 times the speed. So I don't know what I'm going to do for in-person lectures. And then I go through the handout, and the handout basically restates everything that the professor went over in the lecture. And sometimes they miss things in lecture. So I'll just kind of go over to see any extra information that they forgot to mention. And then I'll go through Anki and find all the tags that are relevant, add them to my deck, upload them to the Notion, and then just go through Anki. And that's pretty much it. Towards the end, like towards test time, when we have a lot less lectures, because if I have 4 lectures to get through in a day, there's no way I'm going to go back and review other lectures. But test week, you have like max 1 lecture a day. And so I have time to go back to the beginning, and sometimes I'll review PowerPoints and notes and handouts and things like that. But for the most part, I just trust Anki.
And if I can tag on, I have 2 things I'd like to add. The first was a private question. Don't worry, person, I won't out you. They'll send you an email soon enough about signing up for a tutor. Like, I'm not ashamed of it, obviously, and neither were a lot of my classmates who ended up using it. The tutors are people like me, 3rd and 4th years, who were good at a particular topic, and we've volunteered to do it. There's, again, I'm going to say this like 90 more times. There's never shame in getting a tutor. Your goal is to pass. Your goal is to know the information. And if that involves having another human being next to you that helps you learn that information, then do it. And the second thing, like what Julie said for anatomy, listening to professors specifically for anatomy, and I guess just more so the whole thing with practice questions in general, which is why I do recommend starting UWorld in the first year, is what worked for our class was we would do the practice questions, and we realized really quickly that they were very similar to the practice question, the questions on the exams. All this to say, you use practice questions after you've learned the information to see what test writers like to test on. So for instance, you're going to have the brachial plexus. There's like what, 12 to 20? No, there's no. Yeah, you have the brachial plexus, and there's a lot of nerves there, but not all of them are clinically as relevant or important as the other ones. So you go to practice questions like, okay, they're really emphasizing the radial nerve. I've seen a lot of questions about the ulnar nerve or like the C5, C7 combination. Like, okay, then I might just focus my studying a little bit more on that and not on the other things. I think that's where practice questions really comes in. Yeah.
Okay, open question floor. You can chat, you can talk. I know that there was some more questions on my Q&A, but we would just want to give you guys the floor if there's something particularly that we have not mentioned in the past 57 minutes. So yeah, questions. Paper notes. Honestly, I took paper notes in college and then realized I had no time to write, so I stopped. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Some
like I
people
said
do.
before, you're gonna get your papers wet, you're gonna lose them. It's devastating. Everything's on the, I think, Gerald, I think you said everything was on your iPad.
Our class president, he decided that he got way too distracted with the computer, the iPad.
Yeah,
he
true.
printed out all of his notes and wrote, and then I think he printed them like super small so that he wasn't wasting paper. But so you can do that, like whatever.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, print out notes. Yeah, iPads. People use iPad to annotate slides. You know, if you watch lectures in person or on video, whatever you decide, annotating slides is great as you go along.
Yeah. Paper notes are bad for your back, though, so I wouldn't.
Yes, our president had a bad back. let's see.
I was able to download Notion, but
Yeah.
you can talk to Chip about that if you're having issues, because he's the go-to tech guy.
Speaking of, oh, you want to address
It
the next
depends on the
question?
ease of the card for Yasmin, because sometimes a card is like super easy, like it's a really basic card. And sometimes it's like a card that I am still struggling with, that I went through during foundations, especially the biochem stuff that I'm just super confused on. Brianna, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to thank you guys again so much for all the wisdom and advice. I was just curious, because right now, like having not used Anki before, it does feel a bit overwhelming. Like, could you speak to kind of the learning curve and like how you would suggest easing into it and really like getting used to it?
Sure.
The learning curve is 6 out of 10 difficulty. I mean, you're in med school. This is by far not going to be the most difficult thing you do. So what I did before I got to Loma Linda is I actually pulled up the first aid PDF and I just went through like the pathology. I would say for you guys, like go through tomorrow, go through the pathology, the beginning pages of the first aid chapter, and just kind of like see how information is laid out. Unsuspend those Anki cards and then try learning it, see how that feels. It sounds really rudimentary, but the basics are the basics for a reason, the foundation.
And the main reason we created this whole class is so that the learning curve is lower, because I recognize that was a challenge for some of my classmates. A lot of the things that we're telling you is what we had to figure out and find YouTube videos, et cetera, et cetera. So, first of all, we're going to post this recording. Second of all, there's a bunch of like instructions through Notion. And third, we're available, to, you can email us anytime and just ask us questions. The whole purpose of this is to make the learning curve, more doable. So does that answer your question, Brianna?
Yeah, thanks. So just kind of take it one day at a time and figure it out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
And honestly, there's no shame in that. Med school is a massive beast to undertake, and no one gets it perfect.
Loma Linda tries their best to kind of ease you into that, because a lot of you may be non-traditional students, but hopefully you'll remember some things from undergrad, because the first week they don't throw at you like pathology that you've never seen before. They throw things that like, oh, okay, you had to learn some of this for the MCAT, things like that. So hopefully they kind of ease you into it, so you have some time to figure out how you can learn.
I'm going to answer the NBME question. So my class, they didn't count. They might count. They'll communicate with you. A low score is what I'm hearing may be the situation, but I'm not sure. Notability or OneNote. I usually use Notability because I like the sorting format. You will get Notability and what's the other one? There's another notes, right, Julie?
OneNote, Notability, Evernote. There's like
Good Notes. There you go. You'll get Notability and Good Notes on your iPad. So unless you buy an iPad of your own. And speaking of iPad, there is also the iPad Air, which is quite similar to the iPad Pro now. So that's also an option if you really want a pencil that, goes like that, but it's not necessary. First aid, anything else?
There was a great question I'd like to answer was, how do you stay sane? I think that's probably the most important question that's been asked this evening. Yeah, med school burnout. The psychiatrist that spoke to us said that like 25% of medical students meet the criteria for major depressive disorder.
And about 50 have some mild depression.
Exactly. Like med school's rough, guys, but you're going to kill it. I have no doubt in my mind about that. But yes, let's be honest. It is a very difficult mountain to climb. How do you stay sane? You got to keep structure. I kept a calendar. I kept an hour by hour calendar. I had some guy who like penciled in when he would sleep, which is a little bit too much. But like I'd wake up, do my cards, have worship, flip the order, breakfast, work all morning, like dedicated work all morning, lunch it, exercise every day, non-negotiable exercise. If you don't exercise, I'd start exercising because your brain needs help. If you do exercise, wonderful. There's one of our classmates who exercised a little too much, so he had to cut back down his hours. If that's you, then do it. You don't want to sacrifice studying, but you don't want to sacrifice your body either. In addition, you need something that's not medicine in your life, if that's a significant other. If that is drawing, if that's music, if for instance, I do music, non-negotiable, I read about half an hour every day, whatever books I wanted to that weren't school, really great. Some people watch movies and TV and that kind of stuff. All up to you, but find something that isn't medicine to do every day as well.
I know we're in a Q&A section, so, if you need to go, it's okay. We're just gonna, I guess, answer questions until they don't come. So thanks to you guys who have come so far. Thanks for coming. Yeah, we're gonna just keep answering questions. So
yeah.
Let's see. I saw something about, I think Andrew also addressed already, but like, have you ever thought about dropping out? Yeah, I thought about switching career, and that's normal. I think, the challenge of first and second year is basically you're studying a lot and you're not really interacting with people per se, and you're not really having that hands-on experience. And so, whatever shadowing opportunities you had before, or whatever experiences you had in looking at a doctor, or whatever shadowing opportunities you'll have now, like really lean into that, because those memories will help you through amongst other things. But for me, that was my thing. I was like, I need to know that what is at the end of the road is worth all of this studying, right? So whatever that is for you, find that. Let's see. Free time. It's up to you. I stopped studying at 10 every day. Make that commitment. Just never touched the books. Slept at 10:30, 11, woke up at 6:30. Did devos, 30 minutes, breakfast. I never studied. Actually, no. Mostly didn't study while I ate.
Yeah. Preserve your meals, stuff like that's a good one. I see two good questions here. Can you have free time nights to the weekends? If you're Adventist, great. If you're not Adventist, I have a lot of non-Adventist friends. And if you're not Adventist, welcome to Loma Linda. We're glad you're here.
Yes.
One thing unique about the SDA faith is that we take a Sabbath off Friday night sunset to Saturday night sunset. And you'll see that happen a lot. You're going to talk with your classmates about it. I have non-Adventist friends who have started taking Sabbaths because they realize we do it for religious significance. But like studies now are showing, like, yeah, you should take a day off to disconnect from work, school, that kind of stuff, and just relax. Go to the beach, go hiking, or watch TVs or movies if that's what relaxes you. But take 24 hours off is my recommendation. You may feel neurotic, like I can't do that. So some people started off with half the day, but yeah, the majority of them are now doing the full day off because it's nice. I saw another question on Board Beyond Pathoma. Sketchy early on. I love all those resources. I love Sketchy because it's visual. Boards and Beyond is this intern as to lectures, all these concepts, really good stuff, especially if you feel like you're not grasping a concept really well. It's good, short stuff. Pathoma is the gold standard for pathology, which, as I said, is 50% of step one. And it also helps with your classes. But we were in the mentality because we were scored that everything matters only on step one. So whenever you get to your pathology stuff, Hemino is big in the book. You will pull open your Pathoma, and we have the PDF for you guys, I think, on the Notion. Thanks again, Julie. Thank you 90 times in advance for that one. Just look through that, have first aid Pathoma open while you're doing your lectures, and you can cross-reference. It's awesome. Sketchy is great, especially for Pharm and Micro. Because I use Sketchy Micro and Sketchy Pharm when I get pimped in third year about like, oh, like how's this anesthetic work? Oh, I can tell you how enflurane works. Stuff like that. Ethan, personality workshops, picnic, absolutely. I did it. I don't regret it. I met a lot of awesome people, and obviously I know them now 3 years later, but yeah, get to know your classmates a little bit. It's a lot of fun. It's a good icebreaker. Yeah. Sleep schedules. Sorry, go ahead, Gerald.
I just quickly add to that, like, you might not be totally interested in what they tell you, but meet some friends. Like, you'll make some potentially lifelong friends in medical school. So use that time to get to know people.
Make lifelong friends in med school, because when you go through all of this together, because this is you're starting a long road, you'll find people that go through misery with. You'll be great friends with them.
Absolutely. What's the saying about misery and company or something? I'm not remembering it right now. You'll see what I'm talking about. You become really good friends with your classmates. I saw a question about sleep schedules. Like Gerald said, like have your cutoff time every day. I didn't, but I like the concept of having a cutoff time. I mean, no, I'm like, yeah, I would stop at 8 and wake up at 5.
Yeah. Like at some point you can't think. I think you'll find that out what point that is.
Exactly. When you're not retaining information.
If you just like go do something else.
Yes.
Spend time with friends. Like, and you guys probably have learned this in undergrad too, that like sometimes you just need to step away, talk to some friends, get dinner, and then come back and you'll be way more productive.
And for the love of God, do not pull all-nighters during med school.
Do
Not a good time.
No.
One of my classmates fell asleep during our test. It's not a good time. Because yeah, the brain is powerful. It'll stop you from whatever you're doing to get much needed rest. First 2 years, sleep is going to be not that much of an issue, especially if you're good with your time. Third year, for instance, I'm on night shifts this week, so I'm rocking about 3 hours of sleep.
Oh my
But
gosh.
I think that's its own bridge to cross when either caffeine is didn't show up drinking coffee, but wow, that's a full 180 on that one. I'm not pronouncing this right. Jasun, I'm Hispanic. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Textbooks, don't buy any textbooks. Use the PDFs that they gave you on Notion. I know someone who dropped $2,000 on textbooks, and that's an extra $2,000 in debt that she has from the first year.
Let's see, any more questions? Exams pass, fail, yes. All pass, fail. Your scores don't matter. If you hear about AOA, your scores don't matter. You need to pass and just pass. Focus on passing everything and try your best not to retake or fail a block. It is a painful process. If you fail, you will have to remediate. And it's
let's talk about that for a second. I think what happens if you fail? Not the end of the world. Plenty of students fail plenty of exams. Don't try to fail too many, but plenty of students fail plenty of exams. I won't bore you with my curriculum, so Gerald and Julie can talk about what happens if you guys happen to fail a block with your new curriculum.
With the new curriculum, I think is your selective still in October? I'm pretty sure your selectives are still in October.
Yes.
So you end up failing foundations, which is a huge block and it's cumulative and it's really difficult if you get off on a bad foot the first month, and they are worth more. So I think your first exam is worth way less than your third exam. So you have some time to figure it out. But if you can't figure it out, and if by the third exam, let's say you're 2 months in and you figured it out, but you have no time to go back and learn 2 months of material while learning another month of material. If you end up failing foundations, basically, I think if you don't fail too badly, they give you those 2 weeks of selectives. You just spend it restudying and taking another test. And if you can pass that, you're good with foundations. And then there is some time. There's other random breaks. Like if you end up failing a practical, you'll have other time to redo it. And of course, I think for everything, it depends on how bad you fail. If you're just really in need of a lot of help, Loma Linda, it's we just want you to learn the foundations material well, so they have other options for you. But Loma Linda, congrats, because once you've made it to med school, you eventually will be a doctor, even if it takes you 5-6 years. You'll get there eventually. Unless by your own will, you just decide I'm done with this. I don't want to do this anymore. And that's fine, because then you figured out you want to do something else. So
there's a good question here excellently put from Aaron. How does AOA distinguish you if everything is pass fail? Historically, AOA, which is the Medical School Honor Society, you had to score above 85% in all your courses at the first 2 years, which, wow, you'll see what I'm talking about in a few weeks.
But that's not a requirement anymore.
That's exactly where I'm going. We got the email this summer. They've changed it. You just have to pass your first year classes. Like I said, everything has to be passed in the first go, including STEP. You can't fail any board exams. You can't have to repeat any classes. That's a big one. But AOA has taken the approach now. We're going to more so focus on clinical proficiency. So this means evaluations and recommendations from third-year attendings. They're going to be in a few weeks, actually, because our first rotation is almost done. We're going to start receiving emails like, hey, you were nominated by this attending for AOA, keep up the good work. You need 3. You need 3 total recommendations. It's also incorporates your third year shelf exams, which are the exams at the end of every rotation. So don't worry about AOA right now. Just know it looks good on resumes, but it doesn't make you any less or more of a doctor if you have it or don't. That's something that you'll approach as you get into your third year. That's a good question, though.
Basically, take these 2 years to learn how do you take in information? How do you study information? How do you retain information? It will change by block, but those are the 3 questions you're going to have to continue to ask.
Yeah. And I forgot to add this when Julie was talking about it. When it comes to failing blocks and what happens to you guys, that's why I'm a huge proponent of getting a tutor prophylactically. Before you need one, just make sure you're doing good. Yeah, for instance, you guys are going to hear a lot about pathophysiology, the meme that class is. A lot of students, I'll say over half the students got tutors before second year even began for us because we didn't want to risk anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Gerald kind of said this a minute ago, and I'll re-emphasize that. Don't be afraid to change how you study, because you will need to change how you study.
Yes.
For foundations, you notice that there is a sketchy area in your foundations block on Notion, but there's nothing there because for sketchy, you can't really use it during foundations because mainly you use it for micro. But then when you start hitting Heme Immuno, MSK, there are a ton of sketchy videos that are really helpful. And if you pass if you pass foundations just fine, and you're like, oh, I never use sketchy, I don't want to use it because it's not going to be helpful for me. Don't say that, because Heme Immuno is totally different from foundations, and MSK is totally different from Heme Immuno. So Gerald and I are heading into the neuro block, and I'm terrified because I know that I will have to change how I study because what I used the past year may not work for neuro. So
Yes.
it's a lot of fun you guys are probably moving to Loma Linda area. There's a lot of change going on in your life already. And I get it that it's scary, but it'll keep happening for all of us in the next decade.
Let me address neuro really quickly. You guys, the first years don't have to worry about neuro until your second year, but just to keep something in the back of your mind, your neuro professor is considered to be one of the best lecturers in the country. We're very blessed to have Dr. Brad Cole here. He writes first aid. He's a giant among us. He's one of the reasons a lot of us enjoyed neurology is because he's such a good lecturer. And you're going to have throughout your whole spectrum of lecture, you're going to have some that are really regrettable when it comes to how they teach. And you're just like, I can learn a lot better by just staring at a wall and thinking about it. But then you're going to have people like Brad Cole. You're going to have people like Leonard Werner, who taught pathophysiology, who was a good lecturer, and you learned a lot of information from him. Like we've said many times before, find what works for you.
I want to actually show something real quick that I realized, because I'm primarily an Anki user, but when I hit Heme Immuno, I realized, I guess the weakness of Anki is that there are a lot of maybe facts that are everywhere, and how do you connect them? And sometimes you miss the big picture. So like one thing I used was like a Google Doc that like put everything together. I just use this for example. Let's put here. And so like I basically, it's kind of like an outline of things that I felt weren't connecting on Anki. I didn't put everything on the notes onto this, right? So I would like organize diseases based on like, certain headings. So like, where's my adrenal gland diseases? Yeah. So like cortisol, either not enough cortisol or too much cortisol, or and basically I use this, and when I like did Anki cards, I would like reference this as I went along. You can also reference your notes too. So you're like, okay, like this is where I'm memorizing information, right here in the tree or here in the tree. And so you're able to like get the idea of the big picture as you're memorizing all the small facts along the way. Like case presentation, you're going to see some of those cards that we put in there. Those are really helpful, because a disparate set of facts you might not be able to synthesize into a what does the patient look like if you just memorized all of them randomly. So yeah.
If I could interject quickly, if you guys don't mind, I'm just like, whenever like a nugget pops in my mind about a class, I'll lay it down. You guys have micro your first year, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Onward. Yes.
Okay, sweet. They're gonna try to scare you. It's like, oh, you can't use sketchy for our class. We got that a lot. One of our professors really yelled at one of our students. I said, you can't use sketchy for my class. Guess what we all did? Yeah, sketchy is a wonderful resource. Use it. We can talk more about this later. If you have any questions about it, feel free to hit me up. I'm on Facebook. I think I'm part of your class page. I am.
Sketchy is amazing.
It really is. And the Anki cards that accompany, I don't know if that was mentioned actually. Yeah, the reason like 90% of sketchy is like the Anki cards that are done with it. They're really well done cards that I still use in third year actually. Like I talk about, like you have your anesthetic, you have like your pharm and your micro. The path not so much, but you definitely keep up with the pharm cards at least during third year.
Yeah. So they have like pictures like linked with everything. It's crazy. The people put the time into. They put in literally first aid pages in the card that's relevant to your card. They'll put in sketchy, they'll put in pathoma. It's ridiculous. So the amount of integration that med students around the country have been doing on this. Andrew, you were going to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, well put. The thing I forgot to say about sketchy was when it'll come up in micro, they'll talk about Staph aureus or like coccidomycosis, and only say 2 things about it, and they'll say, oh, we'll tell you more about this later on. Front load sketchy. It's going to be painful, but it's really worth it. For instance, like let's say Staph aureus. We started out with cardio, and yeah, Staph aureus causes some mitral regurgitation, some stenosis, that kind of stuff. That was all they talked about. Well, I just learned the entire video anyways, so that when it came up later on in the derm section or the MSK system, you already know the information. And because you're using Anki, it's really easy to front load stuff actually.
Having said that, it's hard, so it's okay if you can't.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
System, so just pass. It sounds weird because all of you probably had to think about high GPA and high MCAT score, and this is a whole new feeling of just pass until you start medical school and then realize it's a lot to pass, which is okay. And so start thinking of your classmates as teammates and not as competitors. You're not competing against each other right now. You're all friends. You're all trying to pass together, and it doesn't, like, if you do better than someone else, doesn't make it better. Third year is when maybe at the point when you start, trying to distinguish yourself. Step 2 will be the new step 1. The score doesn't change. Like, so there will be a point where you're going to have to be competitive, but not now. Like, just don't, please. Yeah.
Ethan asked the question, you guys buy Sketchy? I did, others didn't. I bought it just because I like to support them. They were awesome, but you don't necessarily have to. One incentive to buy it is they do have practice questions for every one of the videos they have. I tried them a few times, weren't that helpful, so I dropped it. It's up to you. You can do a 2-week free trial, I think it is. Yeah, and pass fail only, yeah. The pass fail thing is huge because, wow, the stress of having graded would be a lot. And those other 2 can tell you about that. But don't take it lightly. It's not so simple. It's 70%, but I like to tell people, like, it's the hardest 70% you're going to have to muster.
Right.
Out of there. A lot of prayers thrown up on test mornings, like, just give me that 70%. Well, for us it was 65, but for you guys, like 70%.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this may not be something you guys need to worry about at all yet, but it's a huge debate in the medical community, if you haven't heard it, of like whether or not it's a good thing that step 1 is pass fail, because that means that, right now I'm happy about it because it means next year I don't need to stress as much about passing step, but 2-3 years from now when I'm taking step 2, I'm going to be mad stressing because that'll be the only number that residency is assigned to my head. And for you guys too, since you guys will also be taking pass fail step. So it's like a good thing right now, but in 3 years, I'm sure I'm going to be hating it.
Let me lend my insight on that. I think that becoming pass fail is excellent. I was the last class to take step with a numbered score. Let me lay out the situation in less than a minute. Long story short, some residencies, most residencies, wouldn't even grant you interviews unless you scored above a certain number, let's say, again, among a certain percentile. So that's a high stress for a first and second year. So imagine not getting into your dream specialty, this way I like to put it, because you didn't do that good on a test about the basic sciences. Okay, step 2 is about clinical medicine, stuff that actually matters in the hospital. No one's going to ask you about the theoretical stuff of Staph aureus or cardiac phys. They're going to ask you, how do you treat a patient? How do you diagnose a patient? What's your treatment plan? Next best management, that kind of stuff. That's why I think step going pass fail is a great thing for you guys. It allows you more so on focusing to learn the content and not trying to game the system and learn how step 1 works, which is what all of us did.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a lot that we covered, and you're probably feeling overwhelmed right now. And I just want to tell you, you know what? That's normal. You're going to learn this as you go along, and we basically give you a very broad overstroking overview of what's coming up. And so, you will learn it, and it's a process. You're not going to hit human immuno until 12 weeks in November. It's July. So just focus on the now, enjoy life, spend some time with friends.
Yeah.
And just take it one day at a time. We are available to email. I think I put CC copied Andrew and Julian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Julie is also, heading Notion. One of our colleagues, what's his name? Julie, the guy who helped us a lot. I forgot his name. Yes, Randy. Thank you. Oh my gosh, sorry, Randy. Randy was the man behind tagging. You can thank him for not having to sort through Anki yourself, which is what I did. So Yeah, we are here to help. And yeah, so, okay, we're gonna let you guys go. Have a life. Take care. Maybe see you around somewhere. So
You guys are going to do great. Yeah. Enjoy the time you have before school starts.